This section demonstrates the concept of lift used in customer segmentation models. We can divide the data into groups as fine as we want. Here in our example, we're going to divide them into 10 equal portions of the population, or groups of 10% each. These groups have some identifiable features such as the zip code, income level, and so on to make up their profile. We can then sample and identify the portion of sales for each of our groups. The idea behind Lift is to send promotional materials which has a unit cost to those groups that have the greatest probability of positive responses first. So what you start with on this is you look at your expected customer response for your individual segments, and you sort them with your highest expected customer response listed first, and then you can calculate the rest of the items in the chart, and we'll go through that throughout this presentation. But once you've completed that chart, you can visualize your lift by plotting the responses against the proportion of the total population of potential customers. Note that the segments are sorted by expected customer response here. Here, both the cumulative responses and cumulative proportion of the population are graphed to identify the lift. And remember, lift is going to be the difference between the two lines. But the purpose of lift analysis is to identify the most responsive segments. Here, the greatest lift is obtained from our first 5 segments. But we're probably more interested in profit. So here we can also identify the most profitable policy. And what needs to be done is to identify the portion of the population to send the promotional materials to. So, for instance, if an average profit of $200 is expected for each positive response, and a cost of $25 is expected for each set of promotional material sent out, it obviously would be more profitable to send to the first segment because it has the highest expected value of 0.2 positive responses. So 200 times 0.2 equals an expected revenue of $40. Then we have the $25 cost for mailing, giving us a $15 profit. But it still might be possible to improve the overall profit by sending to other segments as well. Remember, we're always going to select our segments with larger response rates first. And then we'll plot the cumulative profit, and we'll look at that here on the next slide. So our second most responsive segment would also be profitable, because if we do 200 times our expected customer response rate of 0.17, we get $34, and then we have $25 per mailing to get a profit for this individual segment of being $9. So then we get a cumulative expected payoff of 15 plus 9 to get our $24. It turns out that the fourth most responsive segment collects 0.13 times 200 to give us $26 for a net profit of $1, while the fifth most responsive segment collects $200 times 0.12 times 24 to get $24 for a net loss of $1. So here we can see that in our last column over here. And so that tells me that our maximum profit is reached at that fourth segment. And we can see that here in our graph. So we see that our profit line reaches its maximum for that fourth segment. And so it's clear that the maximum profit is found by sending to the 4 most responsive segments of the 10 in our population. And so the implication is that in this case, the promotional materials should be sent to the 4 segments expected to have the largest response rates. If there was a promotional budget, it would be applied to as many segments as the budget would support in order of the expected response rates up to the 4th segment. And so it's possible to focus sometimes on the wrong measure. And so the basic objective of lift analysis and marketing is to identify those customers whose decisions will be influenced by your marketing efforts in a positive way. So in short, the methodology described earlier identifies those segments of the customer base that would be expected to purchase. This may or may not have been due to the marketing campaign effort. And so that same methodology can be applied, but maybe more detailed data would be needed to identify those whose decisions were changed by the marketing campaign rather than those that would have purchased anyways. So now let's go through another example where you can work through this on your own. So we have our credit card solicitations being mailed out at $6 per mailing. We've gathered data and we're able to profile our people into the groups given here below. And we expect to make $100 in net present profit for each positive response. So the first thing we're going to do is calculate and then plot our lift. And then we're going to look at our profit policy. So the first thing to do for calculating lift is to take your response rates and order them in decreasing order. And then we can find our proportion or expected responses by taking your response rate for your individual segment divided by your total response rate to get your proportion for that segment. And then your cumulative response proportion will be the proportion or expected responses for your individual segment and all of the segments preceding it. Notice that your cumulative response proportion will always be 1 for whatever your last segment is. Then your random average proportion is going to be the cumulative value of the 10 segments being distributed evenly. And then your lift is going to be your cumulative response proportion minus your random average proportion. And so then if we were to graph this and plot the cumulative response proportion, we see that we have that greatest difference between our two lines, probably at segment 6, and it starts to kind of drop off at segment 7. So the next thing that it wants us to do is to calculate our profit policy. And so here we're going to take our response rate and multiply it by 100 to get our expected value, because we expect to get $100 per positive customer. And then your cumulative expected revenue will be the revenue for your segment and the sum of the segments preceding it. And then your cumulative cost will be your segment number multiplied by the $6 mailing fee. And then your expected payoff is going to be your cumulative expected revenue minus your cumulative costs. And so when we plot that, we're able to see that based on the profit data above, the maximum profit results from including our first first 7 segments. But if we look at profit analysis alone, we probably should only use the first 6.